Welcome in, everyone. Ready for another deep dive. Today, we're winding back the clock to the 1990s.
The decade that brought us dial-up internet, grunge music, and, well, a president who wasn't afraid to play a little saxophone on late-night TV, Bill Clinton.
Yeah, Bill Clinton. His election in 92 really was a turning point and shaped so much of what we see even today, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. It's interesting how much of the 90s is still relevant to our conversations, both about politics and just, well, culture in general.
And yet, the world felt so different back then, almost hard to put yourself back in that mindset. So before we get into Clinton himself, paint a picture for us. What was America like as the 80s were ending?
Okay, so imagine. The Berlin Wall had just come down, right?
Yeah.
It marked the end of the Cold War, but also created so much uncertainty. People didn't really know what this new world order was going to look like.
Right. It was a time of huge change. And on top of that,
America was dealing with a recession. People were worried about their jobs, their finances, and they were just over these older politicians who'd been around forever making the same promises.
And we can't forget about the media landscape. It was changing dramatically, too. Right?
Oh, absolutely. This was the time when cable news, especially CNN, was becoming more and more influential. And then there was the internet, still in its early stages, but already changing how people got information.
All these ingredients, all this change, it really set the stage for someone like Clinton to come in and shake things up.
Exactly. There was a feeling even back then that something different was about to happen.
What was it about Clinton, though? Why do you think his message worked so well, especially with those voters who were just, I don't know, tired of the way things were?
Well, Clinton had this knack for understanding the mood, the zeitgeist, you could say.
The zeitgeist. Love that word.
He represented a new generation of leadership, a breath of fresh air, compared to those older politicians who just seemed out of touch.
He had a youthful energy, that's for sure.
Yeah, and his message, it was all about hope, about optimism, about a fresh start. That really resonated with voters, especially younger generations. They were hungry for something different.
But he wasn't all charisma, right? The guy was a seriously smart politician. He basically wrote the book on triangulation, didn't he, for those who don't know that term?
Oh, right, triangulation. It became his signature move. Basically, he'd position himself as a moderate Democrat, finding common ground between the two parties to get things done.
He was all about compromise, which some people loved and some people definitely didn't.
Oh, yeah, it caused its share of controversy. Some people felt he was giving up too much, compromising on important democratic values just to make a deal.
It's interesting, though, right? Because that debate about triangulation, it's still going strong even today.
It really is. It's become a central part of how we do politics in America, even if it's always going to be controversial.
Yeah.
But to really get why it's had such a lasting impact, I think we need to look at how effectively Clinton actually used it during his time in office. You know, things like his approach to welfare reform.
Yeah, that was a big one. It really showed how willing he was to work with Republicans, even if it meant upsetting some people within his own party. And it wasn't just about the policy itself, was it? It was about how it looked to everyone else. Optics.
Exactly.
Clinton, he knew how important optics were. Maybe better than anyone. Like, remember that time he played the saxophone on the Arsenio Hall show? Genius.
Oh, totally. That appearance showed just how good he was at using the media.
He knew how to connect with people on a personal level.
Exactly. He knew that to reach younger voters, especially those who weren't really paying attention to the traditional news, he had to go where they were. That meant using these new media platforms, even if it seemed a little unconventional to some. His opponents, they totally underestimated how powerful that kind of cultural moment could be.
It's funny how something like that could have such a huge impact, right? Well, speaking of culture, the 90s was a time of massive change. Music, TV, fashion, technology, everything was evolving so fast. Do you think Clinton being president actually played a part in all that, or was it just a coincidence?
I think it's more of a two-way street. Clinton's policies, especially his focus on social progress, definitely reflected the changes that were already happening in society. It was like this feedback loop, you know?
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Think about the music scene back then. You had grunge, bands like Nirvana, Pearl Jam. Their music captured all that angst and frustration that people were feeling. But then you also had artists like Mariah Carey, who offered a message of hope and empowerment.
And those weren't just songs. They were reflections of what was happening in society and politics.
Exactly.
It wasn't just the music either. Think about shows like Friends or Seinfeld. They gave you a glimpse into how young people were dealing with all these changes around them.
Yeah, those shows were often funny and lighthearted, but they tackled some real social issues too, things that people were starting to talk about more and more.
They showed a more realistic, I guess you could say diverse, side of America than a lot of people were used to seeing on TV back then.
For sure. It really was a reflection of how Clinton wanted to move the country forward on social issues.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just social progress. Look at something like NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement.
Oh, man, NAFTA. Talk
Yeah.
about something that gets people fired up, even now.
I know, right? Clinton, he saw NAFTA as a way to help the economy by making it easier to trade with Mexico and Canada.
It was a huge debate, though.
Absolutely. People who liked it said it was all about free trade and helping everyone grow their economies.
But
But the other side, they were worried it would lead to jobs going away from the U.S., that it would hurt American workers in the long run.
and that whole argument, that globalization argument,
Still going on.
strong.
It never really went away, did it? NAFTA is a perfect example of how progress, real progress, often means tough choices, and sometimes things don't work out the way you planned. Another tricky one was how Clinton dealt with welfare reform.
Oh, yeah, that was a big one. He signed the Welfare Reform Act, and it was really controversial, even divided the Democrats. What made that particular policy so contentious?
Well, it was a pretty big shift from how Democrats usually handled welfare. Instead of having this federal program that guaranteed help, it focused on making people work and put limits on how long they could get benefits.
So the idea was,
The idea was to encourage people to be more self-sufficient, less reliant on the government, which sounded good to some folks.
right, but
But a lot of people argued that it would end up hurting the poorest families, taking away a safety net they really needed.
tough situation all around. Shows how, even when you're trying to do the right thing, there can be unintended consequences.
Yeah, governing's complicated, that's for sure, especially when you're tackling these really deep-rooted problems in society. And of course, we can't talk about Clinton without talking about the elephant in the room,
Yeah.
the Monica Lewinsky scandal.
Yeah, that one's hard to avoid. I mean, it was everywhere in the news and got everyone talking about power, infidelity, even how the media works. Looking back, how do you think that whole thing affected how people saw Clinton's presidency?
It's tough, right? The Lewinsky scandal, it's still something that divides people. It wasn't just a personal failing. It became this huge public spectacle, bringing up questions about abuse of power, how the media should act, and whether you can even separate someone's personal life from their job as president.
It made everyone think about how we view our leaders, especially with news being on all the time and often focusing on the most sensational stuff instead of the details.
Exactly. And this happened just as cable news was becoming huge and the internet was starting to take off. Think about how differently that story might have played out if it happened 10 years later with social media and everything. The constant coverage, the way every little detail was scrutinized, it changed how we think about privacy and what it means for someone to be accountable, especially in the digital age.
And sparked some really important conversations about sexual harassment, consent, how women are treated. Those are conversations we're still having today.
It's amazing, isn't it? Like, even for all these years, that one event still has so much power to make us think and reevaluate things. But even with all the, the shadow of the scandal, you can't deny that Clinton changed the game for politics.
No question. Clinton, he really understood communication, especially as the media was changing so rapidly. He got that personal connection with voters was key and wasn't afraid to use pop culture even to make that happen.
And it's a strategy that a lot of politicians have adopted since. Look at Obama, how comfortable he was on those late night shows, or even how Biden uses social media. It's all part of that same playbook. Clinton saw the future of politics, and he wasn't afraid to adapt. That need to respond quickly in a 24/7 news cycle, finding voters where they are, even if it meant blurring the lines between politics and entertainment, that's all Clinton.
And like it or not, that's the world we live in now. So where does that leave us when we think about Bill Clinton? We've got the good, the bad, the policies, the personal stuff. What's the final word? How should history remember him?
That's the million-dollar question, right? I mean, Clinton's legacy, it's complicated. He was in office during a good time for the country, the economy was strong, and there was real progress on social issues. Plus, he had this ability to connect with people, to get things done, even when it was tough. But you also can't ignore those scandals, the personal mistakes, and how they impacted people's view of him.
It's a reminder that even someone at the top, someone who seems larger than life, is still human. They make mistakes too.
Exactly. At the end of the day, it's up to each of us to look at the whole picture and decide what we think. There's no easy answer, no single story that sums up Bill Clinton and his presidency.
And that's what makes studying history so fascinating, right? It's not about memorizing names and dates. It's about having these conversations, grappling with the messy realities.
And that's even more important now, I think, when we're bombarded with information from all sides. But it's easy to feel like we don't really understand what's going on.
Couldn't agree more. So as you go about your day, think about those echoes of the Clinton years that are still around us. The debates about globalization, how much the media has changed, the ongoing fight for social justice. It's up to us to learn from what's come before, to really understand the complexities, and then use that knowledge to create a better future.
Well said. History isn't just something we read in books. It's something we're all a part of, shaping every single day.
And that's a wrap on another deep dive. Thanks for joining us, everyone.